So just to let everyone know, right? We're recording this one. This is not normally a recorded day. This is normally just our touch point for the group that we talked about the things that we're learning along the way, but I wanted to get into this today. Okay. So I want to take us down like a little side road today, okay? Because I've been on a journey and you guys get to go along with it. You're welcome. We've been working through fear and desire this month, right? And the No More Bullshit Intensive. I mean, and next month we're going to go into anger and pride, and we've done grief and, all kinds of different things already. But I think that this is a really good time to bring up this particular subject. Before we move into anger and pride, and after we've dealt with those really low things with fear and desire and guilt and all that kind of stuff, right? The subject is kind of touchy for some people, and it is our relationship with God or source, the divine, spirit, the universe, whatever we use, word we use for the concept of something that might be bigger than us. And I understand that we all have different beliefs, right? And I'm absolutely not going to be sitting here telling you what you should believe. This is concepts. This is questions. These are thoughts about, mostly focused around, what have we been taught? What have we been told to believe? What do we actually believe ourselves? Okay. So many people that experience trauma, grief, loss, betrayal, abuse, illness or injury, right? A general abandonment, or sometimes life is just beating the hell out of them, right? Nothing major, nothing specific. It's just, oh my God, right? Eventually some version of this question tends to come up, and they say, why is this happening to me? Why did this happen to me, right? Sometimes underneath that, and I hear it a lot, is, where the hell was God? And every time I hear that, man, it breaks my heart, because it is the feeling of betrayal behind that, right? It is I have believed in this thing that was supposed to be protecting me all of my life. Where the hell was it, right? Some people get angry. Some people get sad. Some decide that the entire concept of God or spiritual beings doesn't exist, right? Some believe that God exists, but they feel abandoned by him. And some people wonder what they did wrong, right? Some people spend years silently carrying this belief that maybe they were somehow too broken, too sinful, too difficult or unworthy, or too whatever, and that eventually God just stopped showing up. I've heard this, different versions of this from people, many people over the years, and I've wrestled with it myself, right? I was totally raised in a very, very, very Christian religion, and then I went totally the opposite direction with, I don't believe in anything, right? So it was kind of I've wrestled with these things myself. So, and like I said, I'm not here to convince you of a new religion or changing your religion or any kind of specific religious belief. So don't get worried that this is going to turn into some kind of weird preaching thing. What I actually believe is that it's impossible for any of us to know exactly what happened before we got here, right? Or exactly what happens when we leave. So I try to stay as open-minded as possible, and I use what feels resonant within me, right? Does that resonate? Wow, okay, that concept is interesting, and I'll follow it. So what I want to do today is kind of introduce a few ideas for you to play with, okay? Think of me as tossing out some puzzle pieces onto the table, right? And then you get to pick them up and look at them and go, yeah, that doesn't belong in my picture. Yeah, that does, right? That kind of thing. So the basic creation story that I grew up with, and many Christians grew up with, right? My religion was a very structured Christian belief system. There was God, there was angels, there was Satan and humans. They were clear pictures of what was right and what was wrong, and there were consequences, right? It was a very clear explanation of how it all worked, except that there were pieces that never really quite made sense to me. One of the earliest ones was the Garden of Eden, right? So God put Adam and Eve in a paradise. They're living beautiful, wonderful paradise. And then he puts the tree of the knowledge of good and evil right there in with them. And he says, don't touch it. Well, as a kid, I'm like, well, then why put it there? Right? Why?
Exactly.
Makes no sense. And then that turned into, wait, why wouldn't God, the name of it is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why wouldn't God want humans to have knowledge? Right? And then also, why did Eve somehow get saddled with most of the blame when Adam apparently knew how to chew also? Right? If she was deceived and she deceived Adam with that skewed belief, then wasn't she a victim too? So as I got older, I started to see the story a little differently. The tree wasn't simply the tree of knowledge, right? It was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So if that story isn't really about some kind of forbidden intelligence, what if it's about experience? Right? So bear with me here. Imagine existing in paradise. Everything is glorious and serene, right? When you've never known fear, you've never lost anyone or been betrayed, or you never felt shame or loneliness or hurt, can you actually understand that peace and the serenity? Do you truly understand safety, and do you truly understand forgiveness? Do you truly understand courage, right? Or even fully understand love itself? Maybe intellectually, but if you've never experienced the opposite, how can you actually understand any of those? Right? So that led me into a completely different question. Because years later, now we're going through my whole evolution here, right? Because years later, I came across another creation idea. And the basic concept was that there was a divine source, one consciousness, one enormous field that existed in nothingness. Okay? There was no joy or sorrow. There was no love or hate, just the existence of everything. And from that source, through a desire for experience, came countless little expressions of itself, us. Not beings that were disconnected from God, but were actually pieces of the same divine consciousness, experiencing life from different perspectives. So, source experience is Robin, right? Source experience is being you. Source experience is someone born in India, someone in Tennessee, right? Someone born wealthy or poor, someone who lives 90 years, or someone who only lives 9. Every life provides a perspective that could never exist if everything remained in one giant undivided consciousness. And I remember thinking, now that gives my brain something to think about. I can kind of work with that whole scenario. That felt right to me. Because if everything is one, there really isn't any relationship. There's no opportunity for experience. There isn't me and you. There isn't giving and receiving. There isn't pangs of missing someone or the joy of reunion. There isn't courage there because there's no fear, right? There isn't forgiveness because no one can hurt you. And maybe even the entire concept of love changes when there are no other beings to love. So maybe creation, at least partly, right, is the divine experiencing itself and experiencing in general. So then I discovered that this idea is actually much older than I realized. recently I've been wandering through another rabbit hole involving ancient Christian and Gnostic stories, and I came across Sophia. Now I've seen a lot of
Mhm.
videos about Sophia, right? And some, see it as the divine feminine. Some people see it as, different, as an actual being, a general concept. There's all kinds of different things. In Greek, Sophia simply means wisdom.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So in some ancient traditions, Sophia represents the divine wisdom and becomes deeply connected with the creation of the material world. Okay. Different versions of the story disagree wildly about how that happened or what happened altogether, but basically, Sophia represents the help part of the creation of all of everything that we know. Um, in some of those stories, like, creation becomes an error, big mistake, right? In others, there's separation from the divine source, where she is, refuted for creating, and God sends her away, and that kind of thing, right? In some, little pieces of the divine light become embedded in humanity, and part of our purpose is awakening to what we really are. But when I saw these different belief systems, I noticed a pattern, right? In different cultures and centuries and characters and languages. Underneath that is the recurring idea that there is a source, something comes from source, created by, consciousness enters the physical existence, there's separation, there's experience, there's an awakening, and then eventually some kind of remembering or returning to source. And I started wondering whether humans have been trying to describe the same enormous mystery from different angles for thousands of years. And all these religions separate us all out into these different factions, and we war with each other. No, I'm right, you're right. Or
Mhm.
you're not right, you're never right. I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, right? Constantly. So, what if the stories that we were given isn't the whole story, right? Each of us were given different stories. Maybe some of our stories weren't even given to us. We don't even know, right? We just picked them up here and there. Um, and this is why I want to bring us back to us, okay? Because many of us were taught some version of good things happen when you're aligned with God or source or whatever, and bad things happen when you've wandered away from that, right? Prayer gets answered when you're faithful enough. If God feels absent, maybe you're doing something wrong. And when something horrific happens, people, they really try, right? But they sometimes make it worse by saying, well, God has a plan, or everything happens for a reason. God never gives you more than you can handle, right? We've all heard these. Some of those feel absolutely brutal when you're the person whose whole world just collapsed. So I want to offer, like, a different possibility. What if the painful things you experienced are not the evidence of God's opinion of you, right? What if this suffering is not a divine report card? What if being hurt doesn't mean that you were abandoned or that you're being punished and that God never walked away from you? What if the divine isn't even standing outside of you, deciding whether you behaved well enough to deserve love? What if some part of that divine has been inside you the entire time, experiencing all the decisions that were made, all the things that came at you, right? That divine is in you. When you think about all of the really, really the hardest things you have ever lived through, you're here standing today, right? What survived during those things? Just think about it for a minute. Because I think what you're going to find is that the version of you who existed in that experience may have been terrified, right? Angry, Maybe you shut down. Maybe you drank or did drugs. Maybe you ran from the situation. Maybe you stayed way too long. Maybe you made decisions that you wouldn't make today. And maybe you spent years simply trying to survive. But somewhere inside of all of that, something remained. Whew. Sorry. Something kept reaching, something kept loving and looking for light.
Mm-hmm.
Something kept whispering, there has to be more than this. So, what if those things were never evidence of you being broken, but all of those things that kept staying within you, were evidence that light was actually within you? So, fear changes when we ask different questions, right? We were talking this month about fear and desire, and fear spends a lot of time asking, what if something bad happens? What if I lose this? What if I'm rejected? What if I'm wrong, right? For some people, it's what if God doesn't approve? What if my mother doesn't approve? What if my boss doesn't approve? What if I don't deserve what I want? Today, I want to turn that around and say, what if you are loved far beyond your ability to earn that love? What if you don't have to earn it at all? What if your connection to the divine can't be severed? What if your life isn't a test that you keep failing? Sorry, guys. This is a little strong for me today. I know there are people struggling out there, struggling really hard with these things. But what if it's not you failing, right? It's not a test. What if your desire for love, connection, creativity, peace, and joy isn't proof that you're selfish or spiritually weak? What if those desires are actually little compass needles pointing you back into yourself? Excuse me. Okay,
I love that.
I'm done crying. And what if those little compass needles are pointing us to each other
Mm-hmm.
and toward whatever we came from, right? So, next month, we're going to talk about anger and pride. And some of us have every reason to be angry at parents, at partners, at people who hurt us, strangers, people who were close to us, at institutions, churches, at ourselves, and yes, sometimes at God, right? I don't think anger automatically separates us from spirituality. We don't have to be zen and calm all the time to be spiritual. I think anger is a useful emotion. And I think that if there is a God, then he would expect, right, not condemn us for saying, how could you let this happen? Where were you? Why did you not protect me? Those are real questions that people have all the time.
Yeah.
So I would rather have somebody scream an honest question into the universe or at me than to sit quietly and believe that they are too sinful to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Questions create openings, and curiosity can go places that fear can't. So this whole thing brings me back to love. Okay. I'm always saying love is the answer for absolutely everything. Um, I don't know what God is. I don't know if there is a God, or if there are gods, or if there's just a concept. I don't know, right? I don't know what existed before the universe or our world or whatever. I don't know whether Sophia was an actual conscious being, an archetype, a metaphor, whatever, somebody's attempt to explain something impossible and put it into language that we can understand, right? I don't know whether we choose our own lives or if they just kind of happen to us and we make choices as we go, right? I don't know how much of this existence is planned Or how much is simply what happens when billions of conscious beings have free will? I feel like it's more of the second, right, than an actual plan. But there's one thing that is central to everything that I teach, and that's love. And when we move toward genuine love, something changes. When we genuinely try to love ourselves or other people or the earth, we can express it as compassion, we express it as boundaries, we express it as forgiveness when forgiveness is appropriate. Sometimes it is expressed as walking away when something is destroying us. Sometimes it's expressed as allowing someone else to be exactly where they are on their journey without forcing them to believe what we believe. And then there's joy. And I think joy is the vehicle. So it's one of the ways that we remember. We experience it when we're laughing, right? We experience it standing in the woods, looking around,
Mhm.
watching the sun dapple through the trees, when an animal trusts us, when somebody really sees us, when we create something, when music hits just that right place inside of us that words can't quite get to, right? Those moments feel different. And there's a joy that wells up inside of us that is pure. For 1 second, the walls around us get thinner. And I think that's why joy matters so much. Maybe love is the light, and joy is one of the vehicles that carries us back to it. So here's the questions that I want you to sit with. Right? And I've put these into the classroom so that you can read them later. I'm also going to take this recording and put it in the classroom, and I may or may not actually put it out into the greater open group, simply because I feel like people need to hear it. But anyway, questions, right? We're not changing religion. We're not deciding whether God exists. We're not doing any of that. You don't have to believe in anything that anybody else does. I just want you to become curious, okay? And ask yourselves, what part of my spiritual beliefs are actually mine? Which ones were handed to me? Which ones came from fear? Which ones make me feel small?
Not just go downstairs.
Which one makes me feel loving, more loving, right? Which beliefs still resonate when nobody is standing over my shoulder telling me what to do? Which ones really resonate within me personally? Okay? And the biggest one of all, if I truly believed that I came from love and that love still exists inside me and that I could never become unworthy of it, what about my life would change? That's the big one. And you don't have to solve that. That's not something you're going to be solving right now, right? I want that to just sit, that question. And I'm going to repeat it because it's so really important. If I truly believe that I came from love, that love still exists inside me, and that I could never become unworthy of it, what would change about the way I see my life, and what in my life would change? Because sometimes healing starts when we give ourselves permission to question our story. Actually, I'm not even saying sometimes. Healing starts when we finally give ourselves permission to question our stories. And maybe the goal isn't to find the perfect belief system or the exact story of our creation or why we're here or our purpose in life or whatever, right? But the goal here is to pick up the puzzle pieces off the table, turn them over, look at them, and decide what goes into the picture of our story and what doesn't, right? Because those are the things that form our future. They keep us leading us toward love, right? Those are the ones that I want you to choose. I want you to choose the ones that lead you to a place of love and connection for life. So the only thing I want from you is to question, get curious, and choose light and love. I'm going to tell you, choose that. Anyway, this allows us to set aside those ones, all the beliefs that we started in fear or that cause us to feel small and powerless, right? This is a huge part of what we're doing in the No More Bullshit Intensive anyway. This is what the overall scope of this intensive is, and that is to allow us to take apart our stories piece by piece, look at them, and decide what doesn't need to be part of our story. We come to, I feel like almost every, I would assume every, but almost every, I'm going to give it some leeway, every person on this planet comes to a point in their life where they say, this is not how I want my story to be. And that's what changes us. Okay. Now, there are some people who don't say that in a way that is a positive of their life, right? It's that they don't say that in a way of, I'm going to take my power back. They can complain and stay in it and just keep going downward and downward and spiraling because they don't say, this is not how I want it to be, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to figure out why. This is what the No More Bullshit Intensive is all about. Looking at those pieces and figuring out what we want our story to be and creating that story, right? We've carried these stories because someone handed them to us, right? And now we get to finally start choosing for ourselves what our story is going to be. And that's where I want to leave you guys today. I'm going to turn off the recording and then